Given tangent theta is negative 1/3 and cosine theta is less than 0, let's find sine of theta and secant of theta. Tangent of theta is negative 1/3. When you're given a fraction that's negative, you don't know if the negative is in the numerator or if the negative is in the denominator. That would determine which quadrant you're in. That's the reason why they tell you that cosine is less than 0. In other words, when is cosine negative? Well, remember, cosine deals with the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. Your hypotenuse, which is your r, is always positive. So when is cosine negative? Well, that would be when your adjacent side is on the negative side. So your cosine is negative in quadrant 2 and quadrant 3. So now you've got to think about, when is tangent negative? Well, tangent is formed, remember, tangent of theta is formed by y over x. Now, so in order for tangent to be negative, you got to have one negative and one positive. So that would be in quadrant 2. Both the x and the y are negative in quadrant 3. That would give me a positive tangent. I'm looking for a negative tangent, a negative cosine and a negative tangent. So if tangent is negative 1/3, tangent is y over x, okay? Now here my y in the second quadrant is positive, so therefore my y will be my positive 1, and my x is my negative in quadrant 2, therefore the x carries the negative 3, okay? So y is positive 1, x is negative 3, okay? Now we need to find r. What is r? Well, now remember, r is equal to the square root of x squared plus y squared. So the square root of x is negative 3 squared. The square root of y would be 1 squared. So negative 3 squared is negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9. Plus 1 squared is 1. 9 plus 1 is the square root of 10. Okay? So r is the square root of 10. All right. And again, r is always positive. Over in the second quadrant over here, x is negative, y is positive. Think back to your sign chart that we just talked about earlier. So tangent is y over x. We got 1 over negative 3. Now, we're supposed to find in this problem sine of theta. Excuse me. Sine of theta is y over r. So your y is 1. Over your r is square root of 10. But we must rationalize the denominator. Multiply numerator and denominator by the square root of 10. So you get 1 times the square root of 10 is square root of 10 over the square root of 10 times the square root of 10 is square root of 100. You get square root of 100, which is 10. So my answer for sine of theta is square root of 10 over 10. Now we're supposed to find secant of theta. Well, secant of theta is r over x. The hypotenuse over the adjacent side, because it is the reciprocal of cosine. So my radius is square root of 10, or r is square root of 10, over x is negative 3. Now, I don't have a radical in the denominator, therefore that answer is sufficient. So in looking at that problem and in determining your sine of theta is square root of 10 over 10. Your secant of theta is square root of 10 over negative 3. We could write it negative square root of 10 over 3 as well. Okay? So on these, we just have to be very careful in making sure that we're in the right quadrant based on the information that we were given. We knew tangent was negative, but we didn't know if the negative went with the numerator or the denominator. So you had to focus on that we knew that cosine was negative, and cosine was negative in the second quadrant. Therefore, we knew x had to carry the negative and y had to carry the positive. Because in quadrant 3, if you were down in quadrant 3, both the x and the y are negative. Okay? And therefore, cosine would be positive. Okay? Tangent would be positive. If you were down here in quadrant 3, tangent would be positive. So that's the reason why that I knew I was in quadrant 2, because tangent was negative. Tangent is positive in quadrant 3. So that told me the reason why it was in quadrant 2.